All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for hopping on with us today. For those of you that I haven't met yet, may not know who I am, my name is Jesse. I'm the president over at Tier 3 IT Solutions. And, I'm excited to spend some time today sharing with you some of the information that we extracted from the Legal Trends report that was recently published by Clio. If you're not familiar with Clio, they are a legal software um, technology company, and they do a lot of great work, and they are constantly evolving their package and capabilities, and it's really quite impressive. So we're going to go through this today. I do like to have some interaction from the folks. So if you're with us live, we do have the chat and the Q&A available. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in there, and we'll do our best to bring them into the discussion today. And if you are watching this recording later on, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to have conversations and learn a little bit more about what's interesting to you. So, as we jump into this, the first thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit was where the data for this report comes from. And so Clio put this together, and what they've got here is that they're saying that they surveyed nearly 600 legal professionals across Canada. I was happy to hear that it was, Canadian firms because I think every jurisdiction has its intricacies and differences and things that are important to us, maybe different than in other parts of the world. The other part of the survey that they did was they connected with 500, they say, adults in the Canadian just general population. And this was to get their input into, how they experience legal services, attitudes, opinions, all of those types of things. So, in theory, we've got a good balance here of data sets to dig into and to give us this background. And then as we go through the discussion, I'm just going to share a little bit about, my perspective as a business owner, as a technology, focused firm, and hopefully you get something useful out of our chat here today. So I think that if you are practicing in any knowledge-based industry these days, you are recognizing that it's changing. The landscape is changing. Technology is enabling all kinds of new capabilities that just didn't exist even a couple of years ago. And we're going to talk about AI, a fair bit today. And the thing that I want to just remind folks, particularly if you're established in, one of these knowledge-based industries like legal, is that while AI is relatively new and is developing rapidly, and maybe you have a long-established business, if you're not thinking about how you're going to use AI in your business, you are competing against a startup firm who has only ever known an AI first operating model. And I think that plays a significant part in the forward-looking thoughts about what your industry's, real value proposition is and what you should be thinking about using your primary resources in the future, your people, in the continuation of your firm, servicing your clients, achieving, the organizational objectives that you might have. So in the survey, when they went out, they found that, as we can see, a large number of the Canadian legal professionals, 95% say that they're using AI in their work, and two-thirds of the firms are saying it's increased their revenue. Now, the thing that I find interesting about this, and most of the lawyers that we work with and talk with, they have a bit of a love-hate relationship with AI. We'll talk a little bit later on about industry specific versus generic. Because I think up to now, what most firms are saying when they're using AI is that they're using something like a chat GPT, maybe a Copilot agent or something from Claude. And these are general AI models that aren't necessarily trained on the specifics of your industry, of case law, of precedents that may have been set. And we may not all recognize and realize the limitations of how deep these generalized AI models go when doing their research and getting us responses. So you've probably done some tests and tried to feed it some, sample, case information, and maybe the response you've gotten back hasn't been fantastic. So when I see this, what I'm inferring from this is that most of the legal firms are probably using the more generic AI tools for things like enhancing their marketing, um, accelerating their intake and onboarding of new clients, summarizing meeting notes, helping them draft emails, transcribing documents and those types of things. And that's because the AI that's available to the large majority of us is pretty good at that. But as I mentioned, getting deep into the case law probably isn't a strength that most legal firms have had access to date. When we see how the legal firms say AI is affecting their work, I mean, you guys can all read this, and it's really about um, accelerating the speed at which you can service your clients, providing better content, better quality work. And this means that your team can handle a higher volume of work, serve more clients, close more files. But the thing that I wonder about, and when I talk to some of our legal clients, a lot of firms haven't quite figured out how this is going to affect your value proposition. So what I mean is that I'm sure everybody on here, recognizes or has had the experience of working on a file, and you might say to a client, it's going to be 10 hours worth of work. And in the old, pre-AI days, that probably meant, you're going to have a 2-hour consultation and a review meeting. You're going to spend 6 hours, reviewing, drafting, bringing in relevant, case information, legal information, and then you're going to have another 2 hours, set aside for consulting and delivery and, all of those types of things. So it was pretty clear that it took 10 hours to accomplish that task. But now that first 2 hours might be a couple of minutes. The drafting, which everybody knows is intensely time consuming, even if you're using templates, it might go from hours down to minutes. And so I think the real question becomes, what do we do with that added capability, that added capacity? Because today we might be able to still build 10 hours because clients, understand that that's what it takes to accomplish this type of job. But what about a year from now, 2 years, 5 years from now, when our AI first legal firms have come into the fold and they're now saying, we can do this type of work on a flat fee, or we're billing, by the hour still, and it's, 4 hours instead of 10 because we're leveraging these tools. So I think it's really important and relevant today to have a good grasp of what are the changing business models in legal practice, what are your competitors doing, and maybe even more importantly, what are the startups doing? If there's a brand new law firm in your community, I personally would want to know what they're doing, how they're positioning, what their pricing structure looks like, because those are the firms that ultimately you're going to be competing against, in the future, if not, already today. So I mentioned just a little while ago about this difference between the generic AI and the incoming, and I would say incoming because even though there is legal specific AI, I think we're all about to see some dramatic enhancements in this field. And if you're unaware, again, we talked about it just a couple minutes ago, but the generic AIs, the chat GPTs of the world, the Microsoft Copilots, um, they are not trained on the industry specific information that they would need in order to be able to, really generate a thorough, comprehensive, accurate, legal position. It might give you some directionality of where you should look and those types of things, but it really requires quite a bit of your own manual verification. Now, the other thing on here is the privacy risks, and if you have multiple people in the firm, or even if it's just you in the firm, it's really important that you understand the tool that you're using, what the privacy settings are available, and that you have a policy in place that tells your team what is acceptable use, what isn't, what they can put into it, what they can't, what settings need to be turned on. Because taking and uploading a case file into one of these generic AI platforms, if it's not configured properly, could be the start of a inadvertent data breach or data leak. Now, what we're starting to see is we're starting to see on the right side more legal specific AI solutions. And the great thing about these is that they are built with a similar type of concept as the existing AI platforms, but with the legal niche in mind, meaning there are massive libraries, as I'm sure everybody's aware of previous case law and precedents and all of the relevant information and research and backing. And these legal specific AI platforms are designed to use that specific information. The other thing that we're seeing with them is that they're built with integrity in mind, meaning when it gives you a result, it will actually reference all of the information that was used to generate that result so that you and your team are able to very clearly articulate, where the decisions, where the, statements, where all of those things came from, as opposed to on the generic side, it might present a solution very confidently, but it won't tell you necessarily where that came from and allow you to validate that very easily. So, I think that that's going to be a big change as that comes. The other thing is that, the general AI platforms, it's been difficult to integrate them into your workflows. A lot of times it means copying something out of one place, pasting it into another, getting the response from there, putting it back into a different, place, editing it, right? And it's very, process intensive. Particularly if you're a larger firm, you really need to make sure that people understand how they are meant to move this data around. So we'll start seeing more integration in these platforms. It's going to streamline all of this. The training is an aspect that I find interesting. We had a conversation just the other day with a law firm about this, and I think we really have to recognize that we might all take for granted that the AI platforms we've seen to date kind of operate like chatbots, where we're just having conversations with them. But there's a really important um, set of knowledge that can be shared with your team that teaches them how to chat effectively with the AI platform, how to more concisely get to the information that you're looking for. And training, although it might seem expensive and intensive and it takes your people away from productive things, doing a little bit of training in the beginning will intensify or amplify the results that you get down the road. And then the time, it does take time to implement any new technology, any new process. And so having a well thought out plan is, really important. We don't want to just jump between platforms and see what we like and then throw it away and then start over because that's frustrating for everybody. Now, I wanted to just share this one because this is, some of the feedback from, the regular people that are using legal services that are interacting with you. And I started at the beginning a little bit talking about understanding where is the value in your interaction with your clients. Is it the document that you produce? Because I would argue it's not that data, it's not the library, it's not the research, it's not the document. What most people want from their professionals, all of their professional advisors, is they want strategic thinking. They want creative problem solving. They want help understanding, what their options are, and they want to make sure that their advisors, their legal professionals, understand what they're trying to accomplish and are helping them to get there. So to me, when I think about this in the context of that AI, and we talk about the 10-hour job that maybe AI can help you do in 4, I still think that it should be a 10-hour project, but we should be spending more time on the advisory components of the role. And that's what, AI, ultimately is designed to help us do, is to get rid of those manual components to allow us to focus on the strategic work that we can do, whichever industry we might be in. Now, I want to give an example really quickly of, one thing that I find interesting because truth be told, I just about pulled this slide out, and it talks about clients preferring to pay online. And I left it in because I reflected back to think about my experience with different legal professionals, and it is striking to me how many firms still do things kind of the old-fashioned way. They still send an invoice and want a check, um, and so it's there's like an inertia that needs to be overcome to get law firms to think about the client, right? Because ultimately we are all, in IT, in legal, we are here to service our clients, and we need to listen to what they say they prefer, which is, streamlining their engagements, their opportunities to work with you through technology. Sometimes it's the low-hanging fruit, like enabling them to pay online, setting up automated reminders, making sure that your collections are handled efficiently. So a couple things that we think law firms should be thinking about is in your processes, um, where is there manual work that is, you know, essential but low value? Where are there repetitive tasks that, you could potentially use, AI or automation to reduce that manual work? And not to think of these as opportunities to, reduce headcount or, those types of things, but think of them as opportunities to elevate your people above that manual work, to enable them to spend more time engaging with clients and thinking strategically. Um, the other ones on here, I think the strengthening your reputation and modernizing your client experience, I think they really go together. Um, you're likely going to find that your clients, even for simple things like if they want to search for a law firm, they're not likely calling, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 law firms. They're probably sending an email. They're probably getting on an online chat. They are, doing stuff, a social media message. So how can you, retain the kind of structures that you've built within your law firm, but still invite, those new clients in? How can you deliver a level of experience and expectation that they haven't had from a law firm before? Because those are the types of things that are going to contribute to strengthening your reputation, which are going to contribute to, more inbound clients and, the growth that so many businesses are looking to pursue. Now, from our perspective, there's lots of different ways that we help law firms with technology. And I think that when I look at this slide, it really does make sense, going left to right. And you'll notice that we don't say, on the first one on the left, implement AI, because the fact is AI amplifies and accelerates. And if you have weaknesses and structural issues around your cybersecurity, your data structure, your permissions, your processes, well, if you put AI into a bad environment, it's only going to accelerate and amplify the problems that you have. And so you kind of have to get your house in order before you can get into that AI side of things. So start with, an assessment of where you're at. Recognize that technology is an essential part of, operating any business today, but even more so in the knowledge-based economy, where we need to make sure that we have strong foundations, that we have plans for how we're advancing in the future. And then we can start to layer those enhancements on top. Um, and when we get to the very right side here, when we talk about business continuity, again, while we think about AI being able to accelerate our business, um, we also create risk because a technology outage, an interruption, a compromise of some type could mean that your firm, your business is unable to operate for some time. So, what kinds of plans do you have in place to protect yourself against that, to minimize the risk and to accelerate your recovery? Because ultimately, I think that that's a big part of ensuring that you have a good, stable, healthy business. So we believe that the firms that are using the right AI, that have thought about security and structure, that are applying it effectively, they are likely going to grow faster, serve their clients better, and thrive within the new environment where they can leverage these technologies to get more work done for more clients with the same or fewer people than what they had before. Um, so we've got a lot of content here. I hope it was helpful and useful for you. Happy to share any other information, answer any questions that you might have about content in the report from Clio. If you watch the legal tech space at all, I'm told that you should be expecting a very exciting announcement from Clio very soon with respect to new features within the Canadian market. As a Clio certified partner, we are happy to chat with you and consult and help you decide, what might be the right approach for your firm. If you are not a Clio partner, that's fine. We work with many law firms who run all different platforms, and we'd be happy to connect with you and share any insight that might be helpful to you, ask any questions, and hopefully provide some direction that's of benefit to you. So thanks everybody for hopping on. We do, like I said, have time for some questions and those types of things. So I'll stick around and answer anything that might come in there. But if you're going to take off, appreciate it and have a great day. Thanks for coming.